The university sat above the sea like a secret it had been keeping for centuries. Its old stone buildings clung to the cliffside, their windows silvered by salt and rain, their corridors smelling faintly of dust, paper, wet wool, and coffee left too long on hot plates. Below, waves struck the rocks with a steady violence, as if the ocean had been trying for years to break the place open. Dr. Juliet Voss liked that sound. It filled the silence without asking anything of her. Every morning, she arrived before anyone else. Black coat buttoned to her throat. Dark hair tucked behind one ear. Silver watch fastened tight around her wrist. She moved through the literature building with the precision of someone who had learned that disorder was dangerous. Her office was always cold. Not because the radiator didn't work, though it often didn't, but because Juliet never stayed anywhere long enough to make it feel lived in. The books were arranged by period, then author, then edition. Her desk held a fountain pen, a stack of marked essays, and one small ceramic cup she never used. No photographs. No flowers. No evidence that she had ever needed anyone. By 39, Juliet had perfected the art of appearing complete. Her students respected her. Her colleagues admired her. The department trusted her with difficult modules, fragile egos, visiting lecturers, crises no one else wanted to handle. She was sharp, composed, unapproachable in a way people mistook for confidence. Only Juliet knew the truth. Control was not confidence. Control was what remained after wanting had become too expensive. That October afternoon, the rain came sideways across the courtyard, turning the glass doors of the lecture hall into trembling mirrors. Juliet stood at the front of the room, waiting for the last students to settle, listening to the scrape of chairs, the rustle of notebooks, the low hum of young voices folding into silence. Then Carrie Cade walked in late. Not dramatically. Not apologetically. Simply late. She paused near the door, rain glistening in her dark auburn hair, her loose shirt damp at the collar, a frayed leather bracelet circling one wrist. She looked around the room once, took in the crowded seats, then found the only empty place near the front. Juliet noticed the scar near Carrie's eyebrow first. A small pale mark, almost hidden unless the light caught it. Then the eyes. Dark. Steady. Far too direct. Most students looked away when Juliet looked at them. Carrie did not. For one suspended second, the lecture hall seemed to narrow around that glance. The rain softened. The sea below disappeared. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim, leaving only the strange, precise awareness that passed between them. Juliet looked down at her notes. Today, she said, her voice perfectly even, we begin with desire. A few students shifted. Someone near the back gave a quiet laugh. Juliet did not smile. In literature, she continued, desire is rarely about possession. More often, it is about revelation. What a character wants tells us what they lack. What they refuse to want tells us what they fear. Carrie lowered herself into the front row seat. Juliet felt it like a change in temperature. She should not have. For the next hour, Juliet spoke about restraint, transgression, and the architecture of longing. She moved through the room's attention with practiced ease, asking questions, pressing for sharper answers, dismantling lazy interpretations with a calmness that made students sit straighter. But every time her gaze returned to the front row, Carrie was watching her. Not with admiration. Not exactly. With recognition. As if she had heard the thing Juliet was not saying. After class, students gathered their bags and escaped into the wet afternoon. Juliet erased the board slowly, though there was little on it but 3 words written in white chalk. Desire. Shame. Choice. You don't believe that, Carrie said. Juliet's hand stopped. The room was nearly empty. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Somewhere in the hallway, laughter echoed and faded. Juliet turned. Carrie stood by the front desk, one strap of her bag hanging from her shoulder, hair still damp around her face. I'm sorry? Juliet asked. You said characters reveal themselves through what they refuse to want. Carrie's voice was low, warm, almost careful. I don't think you believe refusal reveals anything. Juliet set the eraser down. And what do you think I believe? Carrie's crooked smile appeared slowly. I think you believe refusal keeps people alive. The words entered the room like a match struck in darkness. Juliet held her expression still. It was an old skill. Older than her degree, older than her career, older than the first time she had understood that wanting the wrong person could rearrange a life. You're Carrie Cade, Juliet said. Apparently. You transferred into the program late. I did. That does not make dramatic entrances a requirement. Carrie's smile deepened, but she looked down for half a second. Not embarrassed. Amused. I'll try to be less cinematic next time. There should not be a next time. No, Carrie said, meeting her eyes again. There probably shouldn't. Something in the answer unsettled Juliet. Not the words. The pause before them. As if Carrie knew they were no longer speaking only about punctuality. Juliet gathered her papers, aligning the edges too carefully. If you have comments about the lecture, office hours are posted online. I know. Then use them. Carrie nodded once. I will. She left without another word. The door closed behind her, and the room seemed suddenly too large. Juliet remained standing at the front desk, fingertips resting on the cold wood. Outside, the rain blurred the campus into gray shapes. She could hear the ocean again, steady and brutal below the cliffs. For the first time in years, Juliet forgot to check her watch. And that was how it began. Not with a touch. Not with a confession. Not with anything Juliet could name, condemn, or control. Only a sentence. A look. A young woman walking into a room Juliet had believed belonged entirely to her, and making it feel, all at once, like dangerous ground. Carrie came to office hours the following Thursday. Juliet knew she would. She hated that she knew. By then, the rain had stopped, but the university still seemed soaked through. Damp coats hung from hooks along the corridor. The old pipes clicked in the walls. From Juliet's office window, the sea looked dark and restless, its surface broken by white lines of foam. Juliet had left the door open. A precaution. A boundary. A performance. Carrie knocked anyway. Juliet did not look up immediately. Come in. Carrie stepped inside carrying a notebook against her chest. Today her hair was dry, loose over one shoulder, auburn catching the weak afternoon light. She wore a cream shirt under a faded denim jacket, and there was a small ink stain on the side of her thumb. Juliet noticed it. Then hated herself for noticing. You wanted to discuss the essay topic? Juliet asked. I wanted to discuss what you said about moral punishment and forbidden narratives. That is an essay topic. It's also a convenient disguise. Juliet's pen stilled. Carrie sat in the chair across from her, close enough that Juliet could smell rain on wool, coffee, and something faintly citrus beneath it. The office door remained open. Still, the room felt private. Too private. Juliet leaned back slightly. Miss Cade. Carrie. No. That single word landed harder than Juliet intended. Carrie's face shifted, but only slightly. The smile disappeared. What remained was not heard exactly. Something quieter. Understanding, perhaps. Juliet looked away first. A gull cried outside the window, sharp and lonely. "You are my student," Juliet said. "I know. And I am responsible for maintaining appropriate boundaries." "I know that too." "Then help me maintain them." Carrie's fingers tightened around the notebook. For the first time, her confidence faltered. It should have relieved Juliet. Instead, it struck somewhere low beneath the ribs. Carrie stood. "I didn't come here to make your life difficult." "No," Juliet said softly. "I think you came here because difficult things don't frighten you." Carrie looked at her then. The silence between them changed shape. Not empty. Charged. Carrie's voice dropped. "Do they frighten you?" Juliet should have answered quickly. "Yes." "No. This conversation is over." Instead, she heard the radiator ticking behind her, the faint hiss of wind against the glass, the sound of students laughing somewhere beyond the open door. A whole world just outside. A world with rules. Consequences. Names for things. Juliet closed Carrie's notebook and slid it back across the desk. "Your essay proposal is due Monday." Carrie held her gaze for 1 second too long. Then she picked up the notebook and left. Juliet did not move until the corridor was silent. Only then did she press both hands flat against the desk, as if the room itself had tilted. After that, Juliet became careful. More careful than she had ever been. She kept Carrie at a distance in seminars. She called on other students first. She returned Carrie's essays with precise comments, never more than necessary, never less than fair. She scheduled meetings with the door open and another appointment directly after. She did everything correctly. And still, the tension grew. It grew in the pauses. In the way Carrie stopped challenging her aloud and began watching instead. In the way Juliet could feel the young woman's attention across a crowded seminar room like heat through glass. In the way every discussion of literature seemed to betray them. A poem about hunger. A novel about reputation. A passage where a woman stood at a threshold, unable to enter, unable to leave. Juliet taught the words. Carrie heard the confession. By November, the town had turned cold enough that breath showed in the morning. The campus paths glittered with frost. Students wrapped themselves in scarves and moved in laughing clusters between lectures, unaware of how carefully one woman was dismantling herself in silence. Then came the storm. It arrived at dusk, hard and sudden, throwing rain against the library windows and sending most of the campus rushing towards shelter. Juliet was leaving the archive with a stack of books pressed to her chest when the lights flickered once. Then failed. The corridor dropped into blue-gray darkness. Somewhere below, someone shouted. Juliet stopped. The emergency lights hummed weakly to life, painting the old walls red. At the far end of the corridor, Carrie stood near the stairwell. Of course. For a moment, neither moved. Rain battered the windows so fiercely it sounded like applause. "You're everywhere," Juliet said. Carrie's mouth curved, but there was no real humor in it. "So are you." The building groaned around them. A door slammed somewhere in the dark. Juliet should have walked past. She should have nodded, descended the stairs, gone home to her immaculate flat and poured a glass of wine she would not enjoy. Instead, she stayed. Carrie looked colder than she had before. Her jacket was soaked through, clinging to her shoulders. A strand of wet hair stuck to her cheek. Juliet's fingers tightened around the books. You'll catch your death dressed like that. Carrie's eyes lifted. Is that concern, Dr. Voss? It's basic observation. Of course. Another flicker of lightning lit the corridor. For half a second, Carrie looked almost transparent with rain and shadow and want. Juliet stepped forward before she could stop herself. She removed the wool scarf from around her own neck and held it out. Carrie looked at it. Then at Juliet. That's not a good idea, Carrie said. No, Juliet replied. It isn't. But Carrie took it. Their fingers brushed. Barely. A small touch. Nothing. Nothing at all. Juliet felt it everywhere. Carrie inhaled, and the sound was almost lost beneath the storm. Almost. Juliet pulled her hand back. The air between them seemed thinner now, fragile enough to tear. I can't do this, Juliet whispered. Carrie wrapped the scarf around her throat slowly. It looked wrong on her. Intimate. Like evidence. You keep saying that, Carrie said. Because it's true. No, Carrie's voice was gentle, and that gentleness was worse than accusation. You say it because you're hoping one day it will become true. Juliet's face hardened. It was the expression students feared. Colleagues respected. The expression that had protected her for years. You do not know me. Carrie stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make retreat obvious. I think I know what fear looks like when it's dressed as discipline. Juliet's breath caught. For a second, anger came easily. Thank God. Anger had edges. Anger had a name. You are romanticizing something dangerous. And you're pretending danger is the same as dishonesty. The word struck clean. Juliet turned toward the window. Outside, the sea was invisible, but she could hear it, wild, black, relentless. You think wanting is enough, Juliet said. Because you're young. Carrie went still. There it was. The age gap. The weapon Juliet had been saving. When Carrie spoke again, her voice had changed. Lower. Wounded, but steady. And you think denying yourself makes you wise because you're older. Juliet closed her eyes. The storm filled the corridor. You should go, she said. Carrie did not move. Juliet. Her name. Not doctor. Not professor. Juliet felt the sound of it move through her like a hand against bare skin. Don't, she whispered. Carrie's voice trembled then, barely. I won't touch you. That was the cruelest mercy. Because Juliet knew Carrie meant it. She would not push. She would not demand. She would only stand there, drenched and aching and impossibly alive, offering Juliet the unbearable dignity of choice. Juliet opened her eyes. Carrie was close enough now that Juliet could see the raindrops caught in her lashes. Close enough to see the pulse at her throat. Close enough to understand that restraint was not emptiness. It was violence turned inward. Juliet lifted one hand. Stopped. The space between her fingers and Carrie's cheek was no wider than a breath. Carrie did not move. Neither did Juliet. Then footsteps sounded from the stairwell below. Voices. Students. Juliet dropped her hand at once. Carrie stepped back. The moment shattered so completely that it almost seemed imagined. Two students appeared at the landing, laughing nervously with phone flashlights in their hands. Juliet turned away, gathering herself piece by piece. By the time the students passed, she was Dr. Voss again. Composed. Untouchable. Carrie was silent. And somehow, that silence accused her more than words ever could. The next week, Juliet stopped meeting Carrie's eyes. That was the punishment she chose for both of them. In seminar, Carrie answered less. Her essays became sharper but colder, brilliant in a way that felt almost cruel. She wrote about desire as a structure of power, about restraint as self-erasure, about women punished for wanting and praised for disappearing. Juliet marked the pages alone at midnight. Her flat was silent except for the heating pipes and the faint rush of traffic outside. Rain striped the windows. On the table lay Carrie's essay, full of sentences Juliet could not stop reading. Not because they were good. Because they knew her. At the bottom, Juliet wrote, "Excellent analysis. Avoid overgeneralizing emotional motive." Then she stared at the sentence until it blurred. The next day, Carrie stayed after class. Juliet felt her before she spoke. "Did you mean it?" Carrie asked. The seminar room was emptying. Chairs scraped. Students drifted out under gray winter light. Juliet kept placing books into her bag. "Mean what?" "That I was overgeneralizing emotional motive." Juliet closed the bag. "Yes." Carrie gave a small laugh, but it had no joy in it. "You can write cowardice in the margin next time. It would save ink." Juliet looked up sharply. "That is enough." "Is it?" "Carrie." The name escaped before Juliet could stop it. Both of them heard the difference. Carrie's anger faltered. Juliet looked toward the door. Empty corridor. Distant voices. No one close. Still, risk pressed against the walls. Carrie lowered her voice. "I'm withdrawing from your module." Juliet felt the words like cold water. "That would be unnecessary." "It's necessary for me." "For you?" "Yes." Carrie's eyes shone, not with tears yet, but with the effort of keeping them back. "Because I can sit here and be careful. I can follow every rule. I can pretend I don't know what happens every time you look at me and then punish me because you looked." Juliet could not speak. Carrie stepped closer to the desk. "I won't be your mistake," she said. "And I won't be your lesson." The words left Juliet exposed. Not accused. Seen. Carrie turned to go. This time, Juliet did not call after her. This time, she let her leave. The door closed. And for the first time, the silence Juliet had spent her life cultivating did not feel like safety. It felt like loss. Juliet received the withdrawal form at 8:17 on a Monday morning. It arrived by email. Clinical. Administrative. Final. Student request, module transfer. Reason, personal circumstances. Juliet sat alone in her office while dawn scraped pale light across the floorboards. The radiator hissed under the window. Somewhere below, the cleaners moved their carts through the corridor, wheels whispering over old tile. She read the form once. Then again. Then she closed her laptop. For several minutes, she did nothing. Not because she was calm. Because something inside her had gone very still. Carrie had done what Juliet had asked without asking. She had created distance. She had protected them both. And Juliet, who had spent months praying for restraint, discovered that restraint could feel exactly like abandonment when it finally arrived. At 10, Juliet attended the departmental meeting. She spoke when spoken to. Approved a revised syllabus. Declined coffee. Made one neat note beside the agenda and understood none of it. Across the table, Professor Hargreaves mentioned Carrie's transfer casually. Shame, really. Strong student. Though perhaps not the best fit for your module, Juliet. Juliet's pen paused. What do you mean? Hargreaves shrugged. Only that she seemed rather intense. Some students mistake intellectual admiration for something more personal. The room carried on breathing around them. Paper rustled. Someone stirred tea. Outside, gulls cried over the courtyard. Juliet looked at the older man's face and saw, with sudden clarity, the machinery already moving. Not an accusation yet. Not a scandal. Something worse. A story. One Carrie would bear more heavily than Juliet. A brilliant young woman, too emotional. A respected academic, unfortunately admired. A convenient lie, polished by institutional concern. Juliet felt heat rise beneath her collar. For years, she had survived by understanding rules. But now she saw the ugliest one of all. Silence never protected everyone equally. Professor Hargreaves, Juliet said. The room quieted, not at the words, but at the tone. I don't think speculation about a student's emotional state belongs in this meeting. He blinked. A few colleagues looked down. Hargreaves gave a dry smile. No speculation intended. Good, Juliet said. Then we can avoid it. Her voice remained calm. Her hand, beneath the table, trembled. After the meeting, she went straight to the registrar's office. Not to stop the transfer. She had no right to do that. But to see the truth on paper one more time before it disappeared into process. The administrator gave her the form after a moment's hesitation. Juliet stood beside the printer, reading the signature at the bottom. Carrie Cade. The name looked unbearably small in black ink. That afternoon, Juliet canceled office hours. Then she walked. Down the hill, through the town, past the bakery breathing warm sugar into the cold street, past rain-dark windows and stacked fishing crates, past strangers who knew her face but not her ruin. At the harbor, wind cut through her coat. The sea was iron gray. Boats knocked softly against their moorings. Ropes creaked. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and coming rain. Carrie was there. Of course she was. Sitting on the low stone wall with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her jacket, Juliet's scarf still around her neck. For a moment, Juliet could not move. The sight of it, her scarf, Carrie's throat, the wind pulling loose strands of auburn hair across her cheek, felt more intimate than any confession. Carrie saw her. Her body changed before her expression did. She straightened, guarded now. You shouldn't be here, Carrie said. No. Juliet stepped closer. The harbor wind tore at them both. I signed the withdrawal. I know. I didn't do it to punish you. I know that too. The softness of Carrie's answer nearly broke her. Juliet looked toward the water. If she looked too long at Carrie, she feared every rehearsed sentence would dissolve. They're already making you into a cautionary tale, Juliet said. Carrie swallowed. Let them. No. Carrie laughed once, bitter and small. You don't get to say no after months of teaching me how to disappear. Juliet closed her eyes. She deserved that. Every word. When she opened them, Carrie was watching her with the exhaustion of someone too young to be so tired and too proud to ask to be held. I was afraid, Juliet said. The confession was plain. No literature around it. No theory. No shield. Carrie's expression shifted, but she did not move closer. I know. I was afraid of the age difference. Of my position. Of wanting you and being wrong for it. Of hurting you. Of losing everything I had built because one person finally made it feel false. The wind dragged the words away, but Carrie heard them. Her eyes shone. And what are you afraid of now? Carrie asked. Juliet looked at her. Losing you anyway. The world seemed to stop at the edge of that sentence. The harbor around them carried on, water against stone, chains tapping metal masts, a dog barking somewhere near the market, but between them, everything narrowed to breath. Carrie stood. Slowly. You can't say that and still hide, she said. I know. You can't come here because you miss me, then go back to your office and let everyone think I imagined this. I know. Carrie's voice cracked. Then what are you doing, Juliet? Juliet took off her watch. The silver clasp resisted for half a second, then opened. She held it in her palm. For years, that watch had been habit, armor, ritual. A small cold circle of discipline. Proof that she could measure herself into safety. She looked at it once. Then slipped it into her coat pocket. I'm choosing, she said. Carrie stared at her. Not hopeful yet. Hope was dangerous. Hope needed evidence. Juliet stepped closer. Still not touching. I'm going to report the conflict myself, Juliet said. Fully. Before anyone else writes the story for us. I'll remove myself from assessment. From supervision. From anything connected to your degree. Carrie's breath trembled. And after? Juliet's voice lowered. After, I'll accept whatever comes. That may be your job. Yes. Your reputation. Yes. Your life here. Juliet looked at the university above them, stone dark on the cliff, the place that had held her upright for so long she had mistaken it for a spine. Then she looked back at Carrie. No, she said. Not my life. Carrie's face changed. The first tear slipped before she could stop it, hot against wind-chilled skin. Juliet lifted her hand. Stopped. This time, Carrie closed the distance herself. Her fingers wrapped around Juliet's wrist, not pulling, not demanding, only allowing. Juliet touched Carrie's cheek. The contact was devastating in its simplicity. Warm skin. Wind-cold tears. A breath caught between them. Carrie leaned into her hand like she had been trying not to for months. Juliet, she whispered. There was warning in it. And permission. And grief. And hunger. Juliet kissed her. Not recklessly. Not as a theft. As an answer. The kiss was brief at first, almost unbearably careful. Carrie's lips were cold from the wind, then warm beneath Juliet's. For a second, neither seemed to breathe. Then Carrie made a small broken sound, and Juliet felt the last architecture of her restraint collapse. She drew Carrie closer. The harbor vanished. There was only the salt on Carrie's mouth, the damp wool of her jacket beneath Juliet's hands, the fierce pressure of Carrie's fingers at her waist, as if she were holding Juliet to the world. When they parted, Carrie rested her forehead against Juliet's. Both of them were shaking. Not from the cold. Juliet, Carrie said again, but now it sounded like wonder and fear together. I know, Juliet whispered. Because she did. There would be consequences. Forms. Meetings. Whispers. Possibly resignation. Certainly judgment. There would be people who reduced them to scandal. People who called Carrie naive. People who called Juliet selfish. People who would never understand that the forbidden thing had not been desire itself, but the lie required to survive without it. Carrie pulled back just enough to look at her. No more hiding. Juliet's thumb moved over the small scar near Carrie's eyebrow. No more hiding. Even if it costs you. Juliet looked at her mouth, then her eyes. Especially then. Carrie kissed her this time. Harder. Still tender, but no longer careful enough to pretend. Above them, the university bell rang 3 times, dull and heavy through the damp afternoon. Juliet heard it. So did Carrie. Neither moved away. For once, time did not command her. For once, Juliet let it pass. By evening, everyone knew. Not the details. Details were never necessary. A door closed too firmly. A meeting called too quickly. A colleague who would not meet Juliet's eyes. A student who saw Carrie leaving the administration building with her head held high and Juliet walking beside her, not touching her, but no longer pretending distance meant absence. The university did what institutions always did. It protected itself first. There was an inquiry. Juliet disclosed everything. She removed herself from Carrie's assessment, then from the module entirely. By the end of the week, she had resigned from her position before they could decide whether to strip it from her. People called it disgrace. People called it obsession. People called it reckless. Juliet let them. For the first time in her life, she understood that being misunderstood was not the same as being destroyed. Carrie did not escape untouched. She lost friends who preferred their gossip clean and simple. She endured whispers in the library, glances in seminar rooms, pity from people who had no idea how insulting pity could be. Some days she came home furious. Some days silent. But she did not shrink. And Juliet did not ask her to. Winter deepened over the coastal town. The sea turned black beneath the cliffs. Rain tapped the windows of Juliet's flat, which slowly stopped looking like a waiting room and began, despite itself, to resemble a life. A second mug appeared beside the sink. Carrie's book spread across the table. A red scarf hung beside Juliet's black coat. One night, after a storm had shaken the windows for hours, Juliet woke to find Carrie standing barefoot in the kitchen, wearing one of her old shirts, staring out at the dark. Juliet paused in the doorway. The room smelled of tea, rain, and warm skin. The only light came from the stove hood, soft and gold over Carrie's face. "You're leaving," Carrie said without turning. Juliet's breath caught. "What?" "Not tonight." Carrie swallowed. "But someday. You'll decide this costs too much." Juliet crossed the room slowly. Not rushing. Rushing would make it fear. She stood behind Carrie, close enough for warmth, not close enough to trap. "I lost a job," Juliet said quietly. "Not myself." Carrie turned then. Her eyes were wet, furious with wanting to believe. "And me?" Juliet lifted a hand and tucked Carrie's hair behind her ear. "You," she said, "are the first thing I ever chose without asking permission from my fear." Carrie broke then. Not dramatically. Only a breath, a tremble, a tear she tried to turn away from. Juliet caught her gently, and Carrie folded into her with a sound so small it barely existed. Outside, the storm struck the glass. Inside, Juliet held her like something sacred and not fragile. Later, when the rain softened, they lay together beneath twisted sheets, forehead to forehead, hands still searching as if proof could be found in touch. Nothing about them felt easy. Nothing felt innocent. But it felt true. And truth, Juliet had learned, was not always clean. Sometimes truth arrived soaked in consequence. Sometimes it ruined the room before it opened the door. Months passed. Carrie finished the year under a different supervisor and earned the highest mark in her cohort. Juliet began teaching evening literature classes at a community arts center near the harbor, where no one cared about her title and everyone cared whether she could make a room feel alive. She could. More than before. Because now, when she spoke about desire, she no longer sounded like a woman examining fire from behind glass. On the last evening of spring, Carrie waited for her outside the center. The sky was violet over the sea. The air smelled of salt, wet stone, and flowers opening somewhere unseen. Juliet stepped out carrying a stack of papers against her chest. Carrie smiled. That slow, crooked smile that had once undone an entire life. "You're late," Juliet said. Carrie tilted her head. "Still cinematic?" Juliet looked at her, really looked. Auburn hair lifted by the wind. Brown eyes bright with challenge. The scar by her eyebrow. The leather bracelet. The woman who had refused to be reduced to a lesson, a scandal, a mistake. Juliet set the papers down on the stone wall. Then, in full view of the street, the harbor, the town, and whatever judgment still lingered in its windows, she took Carrie's hand. Carrie looked down at their joined fingers. Then back up. There was still fear there. Of course there was. Courage had never meant fear disappeared. It meant fear no longer chose. They walked toward the sea together as evening gathered around them, no longer hidden, no longer untouched by consequence, but free in the only way that mattered. Behind them, the university stood dark on the cliff. Ahead, the tide was coming in. And Juliet, who had spent most of her life mistaking restraint for survival, finally understood. Some lives do not begin when the world forgives you. Some begin the moment you stop asking it to.